I just want to briefly give an update on where we are, where we want to go with the Ember Initiative, sort of what the status quo is, what the timelines are, and so on. So as most of you, I guess, by now know, sort of the idea behind the Ember Initiative is that we want to keep advancing the Ember ecosystem based on the sort of positive momentum of the successful Embroider Initiative. Right, where we saw that sort of when many companies with a shared interest come together, no single company has to carry it like all of the load alone, but they sort of everybody's, like every sponsor contributes a little, and together they enable significant progress, as we saw with Embroider, where sort of the door towards Embroider adoption is now open for everybody essentially. Right, and yeah, like I said before, the Embroider Initiative has shown that sort of the general concept works. Right, we can find companies to fund that, and then once we have the funding, we can actually follow through with these initiatives. Unlike the Embroider Initiative that was like focused on one very specific topic, of course, a permanent effort, a permanent version of that. It does not have such a single specific topic or scope that it is focused on and remains focused on, right? But we'll have many different and changing scopes over time, right? Because different things will have different priorities at different times. And it will make more sense for our team that works on the initiative to work on some things within the initiative scope than on others, right? Where sort of we need other people maybe, or there needs to be more experimentation, so there needs to be sort of spread more across the community or whatever. So the idea behind the Ember Initiative is we will prepare quarterly roadmaps together with the sponsors to find the right balance between flexibility and predictability, right? So we don't make like super long-term sort of promises that we might have to break them, as it goes with like any sort of non-trivial software projects, but we also keep enough, like we keep the sort of timelines long enough so we can talk about meaningful advancements on the topics that we focus on, and at the same time sort of we keep enough flexibility so we can work on various things over the course of a year, because we don't make very long-term plans, and we try to keep the topics relatively small if we can. For the beginning, we suggest 4 main topics for the initial roadmap, which first of all is polishing Embroider, right? Like I said before, the door towards Embroider adoption is open for everybody essentially, but we can do more polishing to make like the path towards Embroider and to Vite then specifically smoother and easier accessible for more teams. Right? The lower the investment is, sort of you need to make to get to Embroider and to Vite, sort of the higher the probability is that we can keep the ecosystem together, sort of in moving towards Vite without leaving anyone behind, right? Without leaving any team behind. And that includes things like backwards compatibility, right? Obviously, sort of the further backwards sort of Embroider and Vite are compatible, the easier it is for people to adopt. Includes things like documentation, adapting the most used add-ons maybe, right? So there's a clear migration path. You don't have any blockers because you use specific add-ons and so on. Related to that is that we suggest working on developer tooling. So the Ember Inspector needs some work. I think some work has been done in the meantime, but I think some work is still needed. And also we suggest that we work with Alex Mechnier, who presented sort of his initiative or his ideas for working sort of towards improving the ecosystem, specifically on better Glint and TypeScript tooling, and using Vola as a foundation sort of to simplify maintenance. And the idea is sort of that we sort of join forces with him and support his work, because that's something that everybody in the ecosystem is interested in as well. Another small but potentially impactful thing that we recommend for the first quarter for the initiative is building an easy way to compile Ember apps to web components. It is already possible to use web components inside of Ember apps, and we suggest making that work the other way around as well, right? By building a way to compile apps themselves so to web components to improve interoperability in multi-framework environments, right? And that's what something that we're seeing more and more, sort of companies that open up not to sort of with a goal to replace Ember, but open up sort of to an architecture where they can build apps and sort of like larger systems and architectures that use multiple apps and that might have sort of different apps running in combination, or like apps built in different frameworks sort of running inside of each other, right? And finally, we want to make the first step towards a new router, which is introducing manager APIs for routes and the router itself, sort of to unlock experimentation, right? And this is, you can think of that as similar to sort of these component manager APIs that we got, I think, a few years by now ago, and that sort of essentially enabled all of the work that went into the rework, reactivity, and view layer, right? And the idea is sort of that we, as part of the initiative, work on these manager APIs so that other people, I would assume, maybe Yehuda and so on, can do sort of have the freedom they need sort of to do the experimentation that needs to happen before we can settle on a design for the new router. The question, of course, is how do we fund this, right? And as we said before, we want to stick to the same funding model that was successful for the Ember Initiative already. Since, like I said, if many companies sort of with a shared interest come together and share the load, nobody has to sort of carry the load alone, but everybody contributes a little, and together the sponsors get to make a substantial impact. We have a bunch of different sponsorship levels so that every team sort of can contribute according to their abilities. At the top, there's obviously our top tier, right, where sort of you get a sponsored announcement, the sponsor goes on the initiative website, you get access to our Slack channel, the sponsor logo goes on Ember.js.com. We have sort of sponsors have access to our weekly office hours. There's going to be a weekly pairing session for 2 hours with our engineers working on the initiative. And these sponsors sort of get to attend and sort of contribute to the quarterly roadmap planning that I mentioned before. Second tier is, and then sort of we have subscriptions for 6 months and for 1 year, where sort of the yearly subscription comes with a discount, because obviously we want to encourage companies sort of to sign up for longer, because that helps us sort of get better planability for the long term, which allows us to think about longer roadmaps and sort of be more ambitious about sort of what we're trying to achieve with the initiative. The middle tier is similar, with the difference that sort of there's no weekly pairing session for these sponsors, and the mid-tier sponsors don't get to contribute to the roadmap. That's specifically reserved for the top tier sponsors. And again, we have 6 month and yearly subscriptions, and then we have a base tier subscription that's mainly meant for individuals or small teams, you know, that wanna support the initiative but lack the budget for a bigger sponsorship. And now we're asking all of you sort of to help us make this reality, make this a reality, and sort of have us sort of establish something where we can sort of have a properly funded way to sort of contribute to the Ember ecosystem and sort of evolve the Ember ecosystem indefinitely, essentially. So we're asking all of you and your decision makers to join the initiative. So if you're not a decision maker, then please convince those people to fund this work and help us, like I said, sort of evolve the Ember ecosystem for the future and secure investments that have been made into Ember already. Right. So this is a proven model now, I think, after the Embroider Initiative, and I think it would be a shame if we could not establish this as a permanent effort. So we are right now actively signing up sponsors, but we need more support. So we don't have enough sponsors yet. We're still in need for more funding for this. Our goal is to agree on a roadmap for Q1 and start the work then, and sort of agree on the roadmap before the end of the year, and then start the work in January. And with that, I say thanks. That's it already. If there's anything that anyone needs sort of from us, where we can help them sort of to talk to their decision makers and convince their decision makers to approve budget for the initiative, then please let us know. We're happy to sort of do whatever we can to support you, obviously. And that's the Ember Initiative already. Does anyone have a question regarding the initiative?
I do have a small question, maybe.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. How is the core team linked to the Embroider and Ember Initiative? I mean, this looks like it's a Mainmatter initiative, mostly organized by your company, but it has to be organized with the core team, I believe. So how do you discuss this with the core team?
I could answer that because...
Yeah, please.
Sorry. Just because essentially I was tasked with that exact job. We were working on the Embroider Initiative last year, and then ahead of EmberConf, we had a pre-EmberConf core team meeting where I had to bring up the questions like, what do we do after the Embroider Initiative? What can we keep going with? And that's exactly where the roadmap item of the router manager stuff, or the route manager stuff, came from. So it is true that we want people who invest in the initiative to have a good say on what's coming up next. But it will always have to be in line with what the core team is doing. And there will always be that kind of those sorts of conversations, because there's nothing that we can do in Mainmatter and apply it to Ember that isn't, accepted by the core teams, but also the wider community. This will probably result in a bunch of RFCs and a lot of discussions on our Thursday spec meetings, etc. So it's not one of these things where we're trying to take over development. We're trying to just essentially put boots on the ground and do the work that people have already said that they wanted to get done, and just kind of accelerate it so that people can have it now instead of 2 years from now. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, just to give a comment on that from the core team's perspective. Hi, folks. It is helpful to have. I appreciate Mainmatter's ability to do this, but part of what makes it practical is the fact that they do have people that they can steer to projects, right? So most of the other folks on core teams can't just, even if there was funding to get them to do something for a month or 6 months, can't just stop the other job they're doing. It's great that Mainmatter's got that ability to move people on and off of projects, so that it fills a need that the core teams really can't do with ourselves. So it's not like, even if your company wanted to pour money directly into the core teams instead of doing the initiative, we don't really have an easy way to spend it without the help of MainMatter and other folks like that. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's also different kinds of work, right? There is, I mean, regarding Embroider, for example, right? I think there was all of the work that Ed did initially, which was kind of like a lot of, I guess, experimentation and sort of figuring out how the system like needs to be structured, you know, how it needs to work. And then you have kind of a long tail of like lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of implementation work, sort of to eventually get it to a point where it can actually be released, right? And that is similar in a different way with the management APIs for the routes and the router that I mentioned before, right? It's not necessarily sort of the best way sort of to spend Ed and Yehuda's time, maybe sort of to build those, right? When we can build those, and then they can focus on sort of experimentation work and so on, right? So I think there's a difference in yeah, like Ed said before, sort of people that work on this part-time versus a team working on topics full time, right? And then there's I think there's also like different kinds of work are more suitable for someone doing part-time work than someone doing full-time work, right? So it's really, yeah, it's not a sort of separate core team that works against the actual core team, but it's really sort of complementary and can just accelerate evolution overall.
Maybe one last question, if there's enough time.
Yeah, sure.
The Embroider initiative has been successful, but Embroider is still not active in the Ember new blueprint, if I'm correct. Is it supposed to be the case in a near future? Because this would make a great difference, I believe, and finalize all the work that you've been doing.
So the goal that we were trying for with the Embroider initiative was the RFC for making it the default would be opened before it closed, but we were stuck in the implementation side and getting it working with Vite. But we have recently updated the V2 app blueprint. Just getting the link now, and there are a few comments.
The RFC for it, yeah.
Yeah, there are a few comments in the RFC before we can get it accepted, but essentially this is the start of the dominoes.
But this includes Vite, right?
Yes.
Yes.
It wasn't it possible to have an RFC that targeted only Embroider inside the blueprint?
So one of the reasons why we changed our focus on like going towards Vite, God, it would have been over a year ago now, maybe about a year ago now, was because current stable Embroider has a few too many caveats and compromises because of the fact that it's Ember CLI running Webpack that outputs a tree that goes back into Broccoli, and like it's just a little bit messy and doesn't really integrate very well. The best example that we have of why that's a bit of a compromise is there's a popular discourse thread on how to not use Ember CLI's style pipeline in Embroider. And that's great. It's wonderful. So you can just have like Webpack loaders to do all the styling for you. But every time you change anything, it does all of the style loaders again from scratch because we're not running Webpack dev server. There's no caching in there. You have to build your entire pipeline every time you make a change. And it's those sorts of things that it's like the development experience is actually lesser in some cases than just Ember CLI. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits, but we aren't going to open a RFC to make current stable Embroider the default. We're going straight to Vite. And straight to Vite. And the reason why we have opened the V2 app as default RFC before releasing the next embroider stable, the current unstable embroider, the Vite thing as stable, is because we want to make sure that the community is okay with this direction before we lock in. We're doing a next major release. This is the way forward for embroider. And if anybody has any objections, any concerns, now is the time to bring them up so that we can make any breaking changes before we do another major release of embroider. But essentially, the dominoes are now falling, and it will be Vite by default. It won't be Webpack by default.
One question I had, Vite at the moment uses two different systems to build, whether you're in dev mode or production mode. That seems problematic and people do run into bugs. Are we worried about that when we bring giant apps with lots of history and run them through that?
So the number one thing that we chose to mitigate that risk is that when you run your Ember test suite, it runs using the build pipeline that's going to go to production, not the dev server.
Good.
You can run your test, well, particularly in CI, I should say, right? Like we expect that your CI is going to run, you can still run Ember test, and what that's going to do under the hood is Vite build mode equals test, and it's going to run, it's going to do everything the way it's done in it's the rollup build. It's not the separate modules dev server build. In your local development environment, when you're editing a test, you absolutely can be running your tests in the Vite dev way so that it's very nice, fast reloads, all that sort of thing. I think that's a pretty healthy compromise between those two builds. Yeah. Certainly the fact that there are these two build pipelines definitely doubled our work, right, to do the integration correctly, because every time we had to integrate a special feature, we had to make it work in both places. Vite itself upstream is also like shuffling that architecture around, right? They're not going to use ES build going forward after some point, which is what they're using as well. There's a lot of detail there, but they're changing their architecture upstream too. We're not on that yet. That's not stable for them either yet. But overall, I do think that the trade-off is okay and worth it. Especially given that we can test against the actual build pipeline. Yeah.
The thing to also mitigate your kind of concerns around that is that we're already in a multiple build pipeline, because Ember CLI has Ember auto import in the default blueprint, and some things magically come through Webpack, but also in Ember CLI stuff. So like this is kind of normal for the JavaScript ecosystem. And I would pick Vite, which is getting a lot more eyeballs than Ember CLI is right now, over essentially any alternative of not going down this route.
And you feel like waiting or going to Vite now versus waiting for Vite upstream to get more stable on the Oxy stuff is still worth it? And looking at how much faster it is. Go ahead.
I don't know if you've played with the new blueprint, but
yeah,
it is absolutely amazing.
Nice.
And it's just, to say that it is instantaneous and just game changing, and a lot of the oddities that we've removed by having this new blueprint, it's just incredible. Like another good example is that this isn't just about Vite being the new hotness and let's, get on the meme train. There's been a long-standing bug in Ember for, years at this stage, where an app is not able to define an AST transform for handlebars without creating an add-on and using the weird Ember CLI add-on APIs, because we have, up until this point, hidden all of the Babel configs behind Ember CLI Babel, and there's no Ember CLI Babel like feature that you can extend the AST transforms for handlebars. But part of this work, and if you read the RFC, is we now have a Babel config. It's there for you to change. If you want to do things that Ember doesn't provide, you can do that as well. But if you want to add a config option to the Ember template compiler, you just can, and it will just work. And it's not weird anymore. And the amount of things that we have just code that used to be incredibly weird and hyper Ember specific, like I cannot communicate the value of just it being normal again. It's going to be game changing for Ember developers.
What I really love the most, like the fast rebuilds is great, but what I love most is actually the debuggability of it. As soon as I switch between, like if I switch off of an app that's already testing under Vite to something that's not, I'm like, oh, before I even try to debug this, I really just want to put it on Vite so I could debug in that different environment. Right? And the difference is that what you're getting is, all the code you authored, all those modules you authored are actually modules, like real modules that the dev tools understand. And even the level of transpilation they're going through is fairly light, right? So you get, you can see what, like if you want to know why is this module included here? Like the network tab tells you because it's just a module. It's got an initiator chain all the way up, right? So your app just becomes much more legible. Yeah. So, but it's a good question about like if they're unstable and doing this new stuff, should we wait? No, I think is an appropriate answer. I think it's because the piece that they are the stuff that's changing the most is the way they handle third-party deps, which because that's what they use ES Build for today, right? In order to pre-bundle third-party deps to keep the amount of individual modules you're fetching smaller. It's
And
it's
then they do that
very
in dev server mode, right? They don't do
in
it
devs, yes, in dev mode, yes. Now I haven't looked closely. Maybe one of you who has followed the Vite upstream stuff more closely. The new thing is it just replacing ES build, or are they trying to replace rollup for production builds too?
I think they're doing both.
Yeah,
They're replacing
roll down as Rust, and it's supposed to
Yes,
replace them
exactly.
both. Yep.
Yeah, they want to use the same pipeline for essentially the roll-up stuff is going to be replaced with roll down, and so will the ES build.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing here is that there's an upcoming 6.0 release of Vite that's got nothing to do with any of this. I was talking to the Vite maintainers on their weekly dev call, and the current thing that they're doing is the environments API. That's the big headline feature for Vite 6.0. And then they're going to release roll down support as an optional opt-in during the 6.0 series, and then swap it to the default for 7. So like it's not a good idea to wait for that because it's not imminent. It's some point in the distant future. And I want Ember developers to have this experience right now because it is amazing.